We're good? Good evening and welcome to the Monday, August 12th Maplewood Economic Development Authority. City Clerk Sint, would you please do the roll call for us?
Commissioner Villavicencio.
Here.
Commissioner Cave.
Here.
Commissioner Junowin.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Present.
And President Abrams.
Present as well. Commissioners, we'll have to get that right. The first thing on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Would someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Cave, seconded by Lee. The approval of the agenda. All those in favor signify by, or is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Next, we have approval of the minutes. Would someone like to make a motion for our November 27th? That was our last meeting, 2023.
So move.
Second. Moved by Lee, seconded by Juniman. The motion to approve the minutes of the November 27th, 2023 EDA meeting. It was a special meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
One abstention. We have no public hearings, no unfinished business. We have new business. We have the election of officers. Let's see, Mr. Sable, are you doing this one?
Thank you, Madam President and Commissioners. This is the first EDA meeting of the year, and it is customary, as it is a separate legal entity from the City of Maplewood, that each year the EDA has to appoint its officers, which include the President, Vice President, Treasurer, Secretary, and Assistant Treasurer. The only statutory obligation is that the President and the Vice President must be different members. The offices of Secretary and Assistant Treasurer need not be held by a Commissioner and are typically held by staff who can then support and deliver that service. So we do have recommended actions, which is to motions to appoint as President for the first meeting in 2025, Vice President, Treasurer, Secretary, and Assistant Treasurer. By way of background, in 2023, Commissioner Abrams was voted in as President, Commissioner Cave was Vice President, Commissioner Villavicencio as Treasurer, and then the roles of Secretary and Assistant Treasurer were held by the City Clerk Sint and Finance Director Joe Rube, respectively. And so I'll leave it up to the will of the body of how you would like to handle 2024.
Okay, let's start with nominations for President.
Mary Lee, would you like to?
Certainly.
Okay. I will nominate Mary Lee.
Second. Moved by, are there any other nominations? We don't normally do, sorry, folks, we'll kind of get back into this, okay? Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay. Moved by Cave, seconded by Juniman. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I guess we don't oppose those. I'm sorry.
You could if you wanted to, but it wouldn't.
Got to get into the rhythm. This is a different process. I mean, President is a really big thing.
Yes.
We all know that, right? Okay. Vice President, Councilmember Cave, would you like to serve?
Yes.
Okay. I nominate Councilmember Cave.
Second.
Moved by Abrams, seconded by Lee. Are there any other nominations? Okay, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, there you go. Vice President. Treasurer. Councilmember Villavicencio, are you interested in serving?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll nominate you.
Second.
Moved by Abrams, seconded by Cave, the nomination of Commissioner Villavicencio. Any other nominations? All those in favor of Commissioner Villavicencio signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, there we go again. Never mind. Okay, we are now on to Secretary. I will nominate City Clerk Sint.
Second.
Moved Abrams. This is truly a voluntold situation. Moved by Abrams, seconded by Cave, the nomination of City Clerk Sint as the secretary for the EDA. Any other nominations? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, congratulations. And Assistant Treasurer. Let's see, who should that be?
Pick one.
Okay, I'll nominate Joe Rube.
Second.
Moved by Abrams, seconded by Juniman, the nomination of Joe Rube as the Assistant Treasurer. Any other nominations? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That motion carries as well. Congratulations on your position, too.
Wow.
All right, moving on then. The next item for the EDA is the Housing and Economic Development discussion. And Ms. Parr is the Assistant Executive Director of our EDA. We all have these new titles. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam President, EDA Commissioners. I'm excited to be here tonight. I have Stacy Quilving. If you have not met Stacy, she's amazing. She works for Ellers Financial Advisors, and she has a lot of experience in economic development, so we've asked her to join us tonight and share her expertise with us. I'm going to run through some slides, and I will tell you they bounce around a little bit, so I apologize for that, but the idea is we have a lot to cover. And having said that, I will tell you this is just the beginning of many conversations. It's a big topic. In your FYI, previously we sent out some background that came from the League of Minnesota Cities, if you had a chance to look at it. That talked a little bit about the powers with an EDA. You are an EDA with HRA powers as well. And it talked a little bit about some of the things you can do with that, which is kind of exciting. A lot of those things we do already, but we could be doing them to a greater degree, and so we're going to talk a little about that tonight. And we can get more into the weeds on some of those things as we go forward, but it was just to give you kind of a primer. For some people, it's review. For others, it's more of an introduction, but we'll all get there together. So overview. Tonight, we want to talk a little bit about our roadmap we want to lay out. We want to talk a little bit about your role as an EDA member and as someone that has a history in the community and some of those policies behind it, how we can move those policies forward. We want to start our housing conversation. We have a lot of exciting things potentially going on in the housing arena, so we want to talk a little bit about that. We also want to evaluate our current tax capacity conditions. Kind of an interesting time because we're talking about our budget, so it's great that we're talking about this at the same time. They play hand in hand to some extent. And then also talk about the tools and the resources, and then look at some real-world connections between economic development and that growing our tax capacity. So we have more people paying less. That's kind of an opportunity when we talk about redevelopment as well. And since he's standing here, I have to comment. Oh, the pictures, thank you, communications. They were very helpful with the pictures. Some of these are cutting edge, so we'll point those out. So where we're headed. In October, we're going to be, Ramsey County is going to be coming and talking about some of their goals that they have, particularly in relation to an EDA. As a part of that conversation, we also want to talk a little bit about potential partnerships, particularly around housing or other areas you might have an interest in. So we'll talk more about that. Later in October, we're hoping later in October to hit the road, get on a bus and go out and look at all the exciting stuff that's going on out there that's under construction, and then talking about some specific sites that we've had our eyes on and we think maybe you have as well, and want to talk about are those opportunity sites we should be talking about more aggressively. And then in November, we want to talk about our business subsidy policy and make sure that what we have in that is something that reflects the priorities that the EDA has and our city has. December, we're looking at housing strategies, and I know we've talked about this before, at least through the FYI and through one-on-one conversations with Mr. Sable, but local affordable housing aid, that LAHA funds, and we'll keep saying LAHA, that's what we're referring to, and we'll get into that a little bit more this evening, but that really is something for a December conversation more broadly, so just be aware that's coming. And then we want to wrap it all up in January and February. At some point, we're going to have an economic development strategy summit. And really the point of that is when we get there, we want to be able to speak to these outcomes. You may have more you'd add to this list, but we just wanted to kind of call these out. Establish our economic development priorities. We want to understand where it is we're going. We see a lot of opportunities, and we want to make sure that we're prioritizing those appropriately in the eyes of the EDA and the city council. Determine our economic development approach. We're going to talk a lot, and Stacy's going to talk a lot about it as well. The approach you take, in some ways, determines the outcome. It determines the resources you're using, and it may determine some things that we need to change from a policy standpoint. And it gives us our marching orders as staff. Then we know exactly what the expectation is. We want to create that housing strategy. We want to establish new partnerships. We have a lot of partnerships. We have a lot of partnerships we benefit from, and our developers and our citizens benefit from. There are some other ones out there, and I know you know of some of them that we probably should be establishing. So we want to recognize those. We also want to talk about those preferred options, how we want to utilize LAHA. It's not quite as much money as we wanted to see, but we'll talk more about what we can potentially do with that to maximize our opportunities there. And then that business subsidy policy, we want to talk about those priorities again at the end, and then talk about, as a part of the summit, the value of establishing that ongoing dedicated funding source when it comes to economic development as a separate levy potentially. So why housing development, economic development? Why does it matter? Obviously, it's about public benefit. In our case, we are looking to clean contaminated sites potentially. We're looking to clear substandard buildings. When we get calls, and you all have had them, where people call and reach out and say, this building is a hazard to our neighborhood, and when we go out and take a look at it, the only way we're going to be able to remedy that is to remove it. It can't be rehabbed in some cases. And that's where this comes into play in relation to economic development. Provide diverse and affordable housing. Allow for the highest and best uses at sites. We have sites, some of them you're going to see when we talk about the age of some of our structures. In some cases, there's a higher and better use for some of these sites, and we need to talk about those. The increased tax base, business development, job creation and retention, as well as spurring redevelopment in the places where we really want to push it. So when we talk about a good project, and I want to emphasize good, you'll hear me say tonight, good, quality. I mean, that's really what we're after, right? It's not just more, it's about getting good, getting quality. And we really need three elements, and it's really simplistic, but I just want to call it out. When Mike and I talk about it, Mr. Sable and I talk about it, we really talk about that sweet spot in the middle of the diagram where those three come together. And when they come together, that's where we get the really good stuff. We have a good idea. We clearly need that. We need the support of the council and the city in regards to what's important to us and our priorities. And then we need, obviously, we need the money. We need to be the resource with the money, or we need to have a partner or someone else that comes as a private developer that recognizes the value of investing in our community or reinvesting in our community. So what's your role as an EDA? Part of it is, as your role, is to determine how aggressive you want to be. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, and Stacy will talk about it a fair amount as well. And that's limited versus aggressive. There's two ends of the spectrum, and we sometimes fall towards the middle. As I've been looking at some of the projects we've done in the last 5 years, we tend to fall towards the middle in some cases, or not on the spectrum much, depending on what it is. And there's specific reasons for that, and we can talk more about that as we move forward. Or when we get out on the tour, I think it'll be really obvious for many people that aren't already aware. How we want to use our tools and our resources. And then a big piece is we want to remove barriers. We want to prevent the private market from having barriers in place where they don't want to move forward. And we often talk about it when we talk about TIF. It's about leveling that playing field, right? We want to make sure that we are creating opportunities for redevelopment in areas that might be contaminated or they might have substandard buildings. When that happens, you're already starting off in a place where you've got a building you've got to take down. That's a deficit for your bottom line. So how can we be helpful in that? High infrastructure costs and development fees, how can we help in that area? When we have affordable housing and sustainability requirements, sometimes that can be a barrier, depending on, it might be important enough for us that it doesn't matter, we need to meet that, but how can we help with that? And then our city vision may be incompatible with the market, and Stacey's going to talk a little bit more about that. So when we talk about that spectrum of your role and how much you want to be aggressive, which you can see on the far right, or how much you might want to be limited. It really runs the gamut, and I'm going to let Stacy talk more about this. In the area she talks about redevelopment, it's really obvious, but I want to introduce it as just in your mindset as we move forward and talk about tools. So your approach, proactive and active. And I would say in looking at as I said, the work that's been done in the last 5 years or so, there's been some master development that has taken place. When you look at Gladstone, to the EDA and the council and the staff's credit, there has been some assembly of sites, which is, some of these projects wouldn't happen without it. So it's revisiting that and seeing where else can we make that happen. Actively going out and seeking developers to develop the city's vision for an area. We have connections, Ellers has connections. There are opportunities for us to help be that master developer. Financing, when we talk about assisting or actively pursuing grants, we do that commonly, but there's even more opportunities for that we could pursue. Provide public assistance and determine risk levels we're willing to undertake. That's a conversation that Stacy will start and will continue to have going forward. And then the land acquisition, as I had said, about working to assemble sites or at least buy them up and get ready for when someone comes in, because we're anticipating something's going to happen. And we're going to help propel it to happen. Proactive and active in relation to facilitating between developers and landowners. As I mentioned, we have relationships, and we can use those to leverage in order to get people to come in to some extent when we've assembled maybe a property or we've done something to level that playing field. And then planning. If the city owns the land, we have more control over what's developed on that site, and we've seen that play out in the real world here. Reactive tends to be more planning related. We wait and react to the developer when they bring something forward, and that's assuming they bring something forward. We hope the developer will have a good vision. We hope they'll bring something that we can be proud of, that we want to get behind. And zoning tends to be one of our main controls when we're in that area, in that arena. While that's helpful to have that, it's not always the best position to be in. It's better if you can have multiple ways to get the best development out of it versus just saying, this is what zoning, this is the minimum. The minimums aren't always good enough, and sometimes we need to be looking beyond that depending on the situation. If it's a conditional use permit or other things where we can help bring that up. And then the do nothing. Often this is the inefficient use of land and infrastructure. When you look at Gladstone, over $14 million we spent on that corridor for infrastructure. In order for us to really get our money back and to put the value in, we have to have quality, good development along that corridor, which we're seeing pop up now, which is really exciting. And we need to continue to push it forward on those other sites that we're going to visit someday in October, hopefully. And then negative perception and our public safety issues. I think that speaks for itself. So housing, we're going to take a deeper dive in December. But want to take a minute just to talk about our housing stock right now. There's a few things on here you will be well aware of, but there's a few others that is fresh and might be surprising to you. We have 16,121 single-family housing units, as you're probably well aware. 39% of those were built prior to 1970. If you look there, between 1970 and 1999, 46.3% of our housing stock was built. That's not it's not a measure of good or bad, that's just the reality. It's an opportunity potentially, so we want to draw your attention to that. The newer housing becomes thinner the closer we get to 2010 and later. Our average size home is 2,100 square feet, and our average value of home is $327,900. 59% are at $299,000 or less. So keep that number in mind. I think that's an interesting number. And then this is, as of last week, $381,000 was the average sales price from August of 2023 to the beginning of August of 2024. 258 homes were sold. You can look at that a couple different ways. I just thought it was interesting, so I put it in there. All right. One other thing I'll draw your attention to, on the right-hand side, you can see there the home value distribution, and you can see there the 300 to 399 is obviously our biggest, and you can see how it goes down substantially in certain areas on both ends of it. Median sale price. So just for perspective here, we are the green line there that is on the left. It's the third line there. And you can see the arrow is on it. That's Maplewood. So this is the median sale price. We're right there at 315. You can see where we are on the left-hand side there. And then you look over, and this is 2023, and then you look over to 2024, we've slightly increased that, which is great, right? One of the ways that we can impact that when we talk about our tax capacity, which Stacy will talk more about, when we look at kind of the sweet spot for that line, where we want it to go, we want it to go to the left, right?
To the right.
Well, to the right, thank you. I'm actually standing the opposite direction. Yes, thank you very much. Wow, I probably got you messed up a couple times on these slides. Sorry about that. All right, I can tell you, when you look at the purple on your far left, and the green, that is Gem Lake. It's North Oaks. We don't want to be there, right? I typically have found in my experience, you want to be towards the middle or just above the middle. It's kind of the sweet spot for a lot of communities, depending on what your priorities are. So just keep that in mind. So our housing strategy options, there's basically 3, and we're just going to keep this really high level because we're going to be visiting this more coming up in the future. I want to save something great for those conversations. We have an opportunity for rehab. When we look at code enforcement, when we look at the value as far as the market value of our homes, there's obviously some opportunity to build on our existing homes, right, for reinvestment. We also could develop new. When you look at Century Ponds, there's an opportunity for new. Also scattered site housing. If we decide to move forward with that program, that's also an opportunity potentially to take sites that have had substandard structures removed and then building new ones, and then compounding our funds. So putting our money together in a pot and then turning around and utilizing it for larger strategies related to housing or partnerships. So LAHA, this is that local affordable housing aid I mentioned. The legislature is a 0.25% sales tax that was put in place. We had some numbers earlier on that were a little bit bigger, and the numbers did not meet projections, and they also ended up doing it sooner, so they cut it shorter sooner. So we ended up with $221,546 that in July was being distributed to cities at the beginning of July. There's a lot of opportunities on how we could use this. We expect that number to rise. That is less than half of the year. So we expect that twice a year they distribute those funds equally, and we can do with them as we wish, provided they fall within the purview of the program. These are just a few of the aspects we could consider. Emergency rental assistance, financial support for nonprofits. We have a number of nonprofits that have reached out to us. Some have reached out to you individually, I know, and they tell a compelling story. There's obviously a need, but there's a lead in a lot of areas. We also have partnership opportunities with existing programs that exist. And then programs for construction and financing resources to assist with affordable home ownership and rental projects, which I know, particularly the ownership side, the EDA and Council has shared some desires in that area as well. So we can talk more about that when we get there in December. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy.
Well, good evening, Madam President and Commissioners. Again, my name is Stacy Quilving with Ellers. I've been in this business for a long time, a little over 32 years. So I've lived through, right, 3 recessions like some of you have, right? I've been through a lot of the housing crises that we've seen from, big apartment vacancies to the fall of the marketplace and foreclosures that we had to work through. I've seen redevelopment of 4 of the 5 major malls here in the metropolitan area. So there isn't a lot that I haven't been with, seen, or been through, essentially. So hopefully just some of that background, that you have from me that I can bring forward and just kind of let you, some lessons learned maybe from other cities that are out there. And as I go through my portion of the presentation, by all means, jump in if you have a question, just raise your hand. You don't need to listen to me necessarily drone on for forever and ever. So when we talk about economic development, what does that really mean? So some people think, oh, economic development, that's about jobs, right, creation. Well, no, what it is, it's a holistic program of putting together policies, programs, and everything so that you want a certain outcome within your community, right? So it might be more housing units, it might be increasing your jobs, it might be tax, it's all kinds of things, but it's comprehensive, so it's not just related to commercial development or to jobs. It's a bigger strategy. So what we look at in economic development, I think sometimes people lose sight of this, right? So really development is an operational cost, okay? So cities don't always think about that, planners don't always think about that. At the end of the day, you have limited land. They're not building any more land in Maplewood, right? You're not annexing, there's nothing vacant out there. So what you have is what you have today. That's your playing field that you can work with, right? So everything that you do as far as development or redevelopment or reinvestment or not doing has an operational cost, right? Because if you're not doing anything, valuations may be decreasing, right? Cost of government doesn't go down, right? So it's costing everybody more. So that's what you got to think about when you're looking at your sites or looking at programs that you want to put together is how can we make sure we're reinvesting, right? We have limited land. What can we do to keep bringing that up and bringing folks along with us so it's more affordable at the end of the day to all of our residents? So when you look at that, just a couple of quick stats, I know small numbers on a thing. You'll get a copy of this presentation. It's just, interesting. So these are some of the comparable cities that staff has talked about, right, in the past. And so what I highlight is the ones that are in the grayish blue color. Those are all in Ramsey County, right? The others aren't. So if we just look at your market value per capita, out of the 16 comparables that we have, you're about number 9. Your market value per capita is about $137,000, which is similar to Ramsey County as a whole. So you're about in the same boat where everything is, but again, you're lower. So if you go up and you look at population size, you're just about 40,000 people or 41, depends on which census tract you look at or data that's out there. Your next closest up there are St. Louis Park or Minnetonka. Well, they're at 194 and 253,000, right? So they got a much higher market value. Again, one of them has a mall, like you have a mall, right? Some have some bigger medical destination and some other things that are there as well that may be driving that, but also home values. And then some of the other things that we look is the market value change that you've had from your comparable cities. Again, in the gray are the ones in Ramsey County. So over the last 5 years, you've had about a 38% or 39% increase in your overall market value. Ramsey County as a whole has been about 42%, but you fall further down on there. And that's just, again, lots of things go into that, right? So it's just this is not the end-all statistic that you want to be looking at, but it's just information to be thinking about as we talk about or look at what's actually going on in your community, what should we be concerned about, and where do we want to invest to make sure that your market value is going up or being more competitive with your peers that are out there. And then the other thing is just looking at the change in tax capacity. So tax capacity in simplistic terms for everyone, because they're like, what's that? What does that mean? That's your ability to tax. That's your ability to levy taxes on stuff, right? On people or residents and businesses. So you're always looking at what's that tax capacity? Is it going up, going down, changing? What is that doing? So when you look at Maplewood, it's about 32% increase, right, change, or 32% change over the last 5 years, and you're similar to the county. They're a little bit higher at 39%. So that tells you got other cities in the county that have a lot more valuation that's going up, and you're staying a little bit below that level. So that's what we want to talk about when we look at things where we need to elevate potentially in the future. So one of my favorite quotes, the best investment you can make is in yourself. So I say that to cities all the time, right? If you're not taking care of yourself, right, and you guys are elected, right, for the residents of Maplewood, they expect you to take care of the city, right? So if you're not reinvesting in yourselves, why should I as a homeowner or as a business owner invest, right? So if you're not taking care of the roads, if you're not investing in parks, if you're not investing in your facilities or things that I want to have as a resident, why should I do it if you're not doing it as much? So always think about that, is that you guys come first. You should always, what matters, right? What matters is to us. What's our vision? How do we keep Maplewood what we want it to be or elevate it to a different level or keep it where we're at least? Okay, and that's what you always have to be thinking about. We'll talk a little bit about how some of those strategies can come into play later. So when you plan for success, again, you guys have a roadmap. You got some work to do. And it's not that you haven't done any of this in the past, right? You've done a lot of it. But at the end of the day, you have to plan, right? Okay? We don't go on vacation without planning. We don't, retire without planning. Don't buy a house without planning. So you really got to think about that and be conscientious about it I think you guys have an annual strategic planning, right? And you're talking now about doing that around economic development, which is important, right? So you need to talk about that. You need to think about that, and then you got to think about what your values are and where you want the community to go and where you want them to be in the future. So that you're always keeping your eye on the prize and moving forward. How do we keep reinvesting? So part of that is, obviously, you got to create programs, right? Policies. We're still government. That's what comes along, with that. But you got to figure out how do we put resources to that, not only dollars, but staff, right? It still takes time to get a lot of this stuff done. So that's what you got to be constantly thinking about as you go through this. I say at the end of the day, the most important thing that you guys will do as a council, right, or an EDA, is your budgeting. Okay, it's the most important thing that you do. Why is that? Because it tells you where your values lie. What are you investing in your community and your strategic priorities? Because your budget should align to what you're doing. So why is reinvestment important? Well, change is happening, whether you want it to or not, right? So your city is different today than it was 5 years ago, than it was 10 years ago, and 20 years ago. It's constantly changing, right? And none of us are in control of that, but we can try, right? We've got to try. So really the job of you guys as elected officials, right, and your staff is to anticipate and manage that change, okay? So we always got to think about, Wayne Gretzky, I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been, right? That's what you guys are always, your thought leaders, right? That you're up here, you're thinking about what's coming next, where do we need to go? What's coming down that people are like, oh, that's not really going to be an issue or whatever, but you are forecasting that. So that's just really, really important that you're always thinking and anticipating and talking about those issues and things. And then why? Well, you get to influence what happens to your community, right? You are in charge, right? You can take charge of what happens to your community, regardless of a recession, regardless of a housing crisis, regardless of what may come your way, COVID, other things. You guys are in charge, that you can help influence that through various things that you do by sitting up at that dais. So why reinvestment matters? Obviously tax base, right? Always want it to be diverse. You don't want it all in housing. You don't want it all in the same industry. You like to have a little bit of everything. Single family, apartments, a good mix, right? That's good. That's smart. And why? Because real estate is cyclical, right? So something may be in the toilet from a valuation, other things are hot, and that's what we see, right? Every year in budgeting and what's happening with valuations. Industrial's up, homeowners aren't carrying the burden, right? Industrial apartments go down, homeowners are carrying the burden. So it all changes, and so that's why it really matters to have more of a diverse tax base. I think the big thing is people forget about your brand. You're a city, yeah? But you have a brand, whether you think you have one or not, right? So that's where you got to talk about, how do you want people to perceive Maplewood? How do you see Maplewood? Does everybody else see that, right? So you want to make sure that you're investing and making sure that you are staying true to that brand and investing in that brand that you have. Expand housing options, public infrastructure stability. That's a big one. Public safety, right? I can say from working, for a community that had significant public safety issues before, it's hard to overcome. Once you get that black mark from a public safety perspective, it's hard to work your way out of that, even from a communications or PR perspective. So you always got to think about that. You always want people to think positively about your community and your city. Sustainability, that's big, right? Every city's going there, and you should be, right? How are we being better to our environment? How are we being less of a carbon footprint? What are we doing at the end of the day that we're putting in for infrastructure or for housing or for commercial development that's going to last a longer time, right? So you think about it, most housing, has a lifespan of, 50 years, right? Even though we know we can have houses that have been there for 100 years or whatever. But at what point, you have to start to reinvest? I always say it's kind of like the hotel model, right? So every hotel chain, they remodel every 10 years whether they need it or not, right? Because things change, right? People, what they want to have and what they want to see changes. So as Danette said earlier, you have an older, housing stock, which is not uncommon, right? You're a first-ring suburb, right, to St. Paul, and your house was just built back then. But that doesn't mean that you can't adapt your housing to what people want, right? You want those opportunities for move-up housing, and it doesn't mean you have to tear it down to build new all the time. There is things that you can rehab. So you're always trying to figure out, how do we get some move-up housing so people who live here want to stay here as their family gets bigger, they have kids or what have you at the end of the day. And I think when you look at it, when you guys reinvest or when others do it, it really extends to others. So that's what I said before. If you guys are reinvesting or putting your dollars or your money where your mouth is, then there's always that private spin-off. So even when you guys invest, maybe public some financing that you're providing some of these projects for TIF or other things, eventually you'll see some spin-off in those other neighborhoods around like, hey, that's spiffing up. Maybe I should be doing something a little bit different here. So why consider providing that financial assistance? I think it was probably more the thing that Danette got to at the beginning is, really the role of government is to remove the barriers that stops the private market from moving forward. That's what you want. And if you think that the private market's going to take care of everything on their own, they're just not. Right? There's only so much that they can do because there's only so many resources that are available to them. Or math. It's simple math a lot of times that it doesn't work. But when you look, you guys do your annual strategic planning. I look at your top 6 strategic priorities that you have. Well, I think providing financial assistance is going to help you get to 4 of those in some various avenue that you have that you want to do. So again, it's about that budgeting and thinking, what can I do to go to some of our strategic priorities of where I want this community to be and make sure I'm investing in that for the future. So return on investment comes in many forms, and as we tell most councils or EDAs, if you think it's all financial, then you're in the wrong business, because it's not, right? So financial return is a tangible one, right? So we invested, we got more value, that's great. But it's a lot of times those intangible things that you really, really want to get out of it. And those can be, it's a transformative development. So think about how many are aware of Excelsior and Grand, St. Louis Park, yeah? That was one of theirs big developments that really kind of put them on the roadmap for their future as to where they were going to be as a destination place, not only because of the location to Minneapolis, but again, it was something that they were putting there in St. Louis Park, that they had something in a model that they were going to create something different that they invested significantly have happen. And we can point to those transformative developments around the metropolitan area where you got to have that happen. So what's going to be your transformative development? We'll talk a little bit about that in the future. Again, changing the perception of the area, again, concerns if there's public safety issues or other things, and sustainability of your existing neighborhoods. That's big, right? Because, sometimes at the end of the day, your single-family residential is your bread and butter of your community, right? Because people are living here. So how do you get residents to always come here? And then getting something that you wanted at the end of the day. If you're going to give someone money, you got to get something out that you want. Either it's hitting your strategic priority, or it's taking care of an issue that you had, or it's something that the community's been saying, we really, really want this. So that's got to make sure at the end of the day that you're getting what you want out of it and don't feel like you have to give it if you're not getting there. Life's a compromise, right? Measuring it, it's simple. At the end of the day, well, did we get what we wanted? If you did, then great, you're good. Because obviously your tax base is probably going to go up, some of those tangible measurements that you have, and then your market values are going to go up. But the big thing is, did you get what you wanted at the end of the day by making that investment? So let's look a little bit about what happens if you increase your tax capacity. So we just said, well, at the end of the day, let's look at what happens if you increase tax capacity. Again, that's the ability to levy taxes, right, by 1%, 2%, or 3%. I'll show you tangible uses of this. So say everything stays the same, right? We're living in a vacuum, so nothing else changes, right? Your budget doesn't change, everything else is the same. If you increase your tax capacity by 1%, on the average value home, you could see a $13 decrease in taxes. Up to a 3% increase in tax capacity, it's almost $40, right? So again, that's if everything stays the same, right? All the value, the budget, everything else stays there. So that's why you start to reinvest, right? You start to figure out how can we take our land that's fully developed and redevelop it to start to increase that capacity in various ways. So let's look at a couple examples. So 1% tax capacity increase is about $52 million in valuation. That's new rental housing. Think about this as 210 units. Is it the Oberon? Is that what it's called? Yeah, the Roars development. That's a 1% increase, just about. I would say that, because I think there are 150 units, that, and if you throw in the senior cooperative, that about gets you there, right? And then it's just simple math. 2% you double, 3% you triple, right? So you got to start thinking in that context about some of those developments. Now, do you have to invest in every single one of those? No, not necessarily, but you're setting the stage for changing your market a little bit, right? So it's not all about aging or affordable, that's one component of it, but it is market rate to bring certain things up to get you some valuations to help you with your capacity to tax. So the local funding tools and resources that we look at, it's pretty simple. Money, right? That's the easiest, right? But at the end of the day, the other two that Danette spoke to just a little bit is about your rules and regulations. So sometimes we always just get so caught up in, making sure we're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and being very prescriptive about what we want. But you're in charge of that, right? And so there are things through planned unit developments or other things, but overall, cities just traditionally have been looking at those rules and regulations a little bit more as to what they can change. I can say probably the biggest one we've seen over the last 5 to 7 years is parking requirements. I'd say they were really pretty archaic, right, for what they were back in the day. The models have just changed, right, how people are driving or using vehicles. And then the other big one is partnerships. You can't do it alone, and you shouldn't, right? So it is finding those partners that share your vision. they're equally excited and interested in what happens in the future of Maplewood. So the local funding sources, I won't read these off to you. There's a multitude of ones out there. And when I say about the LAHA, we got to get more excited. It's like, LAHA, right? As we come up with these acronyms, get a little bit more exciting about some of those. But tax increment financing, that's the biggest tool, right, to most cities, right, that you have available. Because if you don't have cash sitting there, it's your opportunity to invest on a forward-looking thing where you have little to no risk. Okay, so you've done that a lot. Your community's also done grants, right? They're active in going out and pursuing those for the various developments that are out there as well. But there's other things that you can do, but a lot of those sometimes you need money in order to do that. The other one is pooled TIF. What does that really mean? Well, you have a bunch of existing districts that are out there, and what happens is if you have cash balances in those districts, you can use them for other things. So we call that pooling. You can take it out of that district and go use it for another project elsewhere, as long as it meets certain requirements and terms. So mostly you have housing districts in your community, and for affordable housing, the rule of thumb is at least if it's rental, 20% of the units have to be affordable at 50 or 40% at 60, right? 20, 40, 50, 60, you always hear that. But for owner occupied, it's 115% if it's a family of 3 or more, or 100% for family 2 or less. And when our median income in the metro is $124,000, there's some pretty significant things that you can do to reinvest in your single-family housing stock, right? For down payment assistance, rehabs, to build some of that move-up housing, things of that nature. But at the end of the day, you've got about 5 housing districts that have approximately $1 million sitting in them. So that's a tool, that's a resource, right? But it's limited. So as we talk about our resources and how limited they are, we always want to be thoughtful about where they go and that we're spending it to get the biggest bang out of our buck that we have in it. Now, you have another TIF district, TIF District 1-12, that was created by special legislation in 2013. If valuations keep going where they are and your obligations, you might have $8 million at the end of the district. Well, that's sizable. But you can't do much with it because a lot of it might have to go back because of the legal restrictions around tax increment. But your opportunity is go to the legislature. That's what cities do, right? I have this balance or I have this need. I got to go ask the legislature to have a tool change so that it works for us. That's what you did in 2013 to create this district. But you might have to go and say, hey, we want this money to come out for some other purpose. Now, cities have done that successfully for various things. Probably the latest one or last one was Richfield, Minnetonka, and St. Louis Park got the ability to take all of their cash balances to put into their affordable housing trust funds. And it's no longer TIF. That's great. It's not restricted. But that was a goal for those communities that they really wanted to invest in. So that was sizable. Others have gotten it for redevelopment or for public infrastructure that was needed in the community that you didn't have a funding source for before. So there's lots of things you can do. You just have to ask, right? You have to have a compelling story when you go to the legislature because it's not a given. You have to have legislative support, but if you don't ask, you don't get. So you got to think about, we always go outside our box. Here's our tools. They're all restricted by laws. How do we go outside our box, or what do we have to change in that toolbox to make it work for us? So again, Danette was talking about the role, right? And I'm amazed at how many council chambers I will sit in EDA meetings that people are going, well, how did so-and-so get that? Or how did so-and-so get that, right? Well, if you're over on the left side, right, if you're saying we're in a limited, private market's going to take care of itself, you're going to be sitting there in the same place that you're sitting today for a very long time. So you got to keep moving over onto the spectrum, which is really important. And not saying that you have to go to the far right and be super aggressive, right? But you've got to have tools and resources to allow you to be anywhere on that spectrum. And most cities will fall in that middle, right? Some will fall more to the right because they have more dollars. They've been planning. They've been setting aside money to be able to do things. What you've really been doing is just you're open to redevelopment, you're open to providing public finance, but you don't have a lot of resources to go after to get what you want. So let's talk a little bit about that. We always talk about building a hope chest, right? So what do you need if you have something that comes along, an opportunity? And I'd say at the end of the day, minimum is $5 million, right? So it sounds like a lot, right? But it really isn't, because $5 million isn't going to go buy you a big vacant strip mall, right, that you need to get. $5 million isn't going to give you a ton of money to go out and buy a lot of homes to get them ready for redevelopment or give you money for public investment that you need. Again, it sounds like a lot, but it's not. So I think the communities that have done it well, that have larger hope chests, right, they're in that $20+ million that they're setting aside. And then they're smart about it when they get it. So just because you have money, we say, oh, you don't just have to hand it out to everybody, give it a grant, right? We're always thinking, how do we recycle it? How do we put our dollars to work and we can get it back? So some we're going to give away because we know we have to. Others, we're trying to loan it out so we get money back so we can help the next thing and do the next thing. So that's what you always got to think about at the end of the day. And so when we look at your EDA fund, you got a balance of $1.4 million, okay? You've been annually levying about $100,000, which isn't much. And last year, it went to the Emerald Ash Borer, right? So it tells me, it's like, where are your priorities, right? Priorities aren't in redevelopment. They're not necessarily, it's about the trees. I get that. It's a big issue that every city's trying to deal with, right, and fund. But you're not looking, you gotta look at the farther goal that you have, always forward looking, right? So how can we put dollars away to build up that hope chest? So when an issue comes up, you can really address it adequately, or you can be in the driver's seat a little bit more. So when we look at that, your biggest funding source that's the easiest for you, only from the perspective that it doesn't have a lot of rules around it, is an EDA or HRA levy. So as Jeanette said, you are an EDA with HRA powers, which is awesome. That's the best place to be. You can levy both, doesn't mean you have to. Most cities that have both don't levy both. They'll levy one or the other. And it doesn't matter, they're about the same, right? So your authority to levy is about $1 million, okay, at the end of the day, under either one of those. So we never say, oh, go out and levy $2 million tomorrow, let alone we're not going to tell you, oh, let's go levy $1 million tomorrow. How do we build up to a point of levying that makes sense so you can start putting money into that hope chest so you're ready for your future opportunities? So when we look at that, if you were to levy tomorrow, right, you're talking about the budget, great, we're going to add $1 million to the EDA levy. This is great. Well, what's that impact? Well, in the blue bar, you have the $327,900 home. That's the average value home. Well, that is about I can't even read those small numbers. So is that $56 a year? Well, let's put that in context, right? $4 a month, 16 cents a day. Not a lot when you look at it that way, okay? It's a 1%, almost a 2% levy increase, but at the end of the day, for that average value home, when you look at a daily basis, it's not that much. So as we all say, when we look, right, who gets their cup of coffee at Starbucks or Caribou, right, that they're spending on that, or our cell phones, which we're all attached to, how expensive they are. The value that you get by that investment from your residents and businesses that are putting into that hope chest is going to pay off for them in dividends in the future, right? Because you're stabilizing your community. It's a place people want to be. It's a place people want to work, and that they're going to stay. That's what you want to see at the end of the day. So let's do a little bit of perspective. So you guys have a mall, right? Well, there's lots of malls in the city. And what I can tell you is that almost all of them have undergone some transformation, good or bad, right, in development. So if you look at it, the first mall was Southdale. The second mall was St. Anthony Village, one that they had. So if you look at all those, and then you look at Ridgedale, you look at Rosedale, we've been working with all of the cities and the communities on this, and also Burnsville, right? So they have one that's similar to you. So I was just looking at it, I'm like, oh my word, I'm like, I never thought about it. Maplewood Mall almost looks like, right, Burnsville Center that they've been addressing or dealing with. It's almost the exact same layout. 5 owners, so it's always difficult, right, that you're dealing with multiple owners that have different interests and they may not align. But more importantly, you have some that are corporate, right? You got a Macy's or a Sears or whoever, right? At the end of the day, that sometimes they're harder to bring to the table because they're just like, oh, you're just this city, you're just small noise in our whole national portfolio that we have at the end of the day. But I can tell you for the successful ones that they're doing is that it's changing, okay? Because as you guys know, right, commerce is changing. How people shop and do things is changing. So the Maplewood Mall you had before that was awesome and successful is just going to continue its decline. So you have to do some things to change. So you look at St. Anthony, when they did theirs, it was a wholesale change. They put in some retail, but it was mostly housing that came back in there. You look at Ridgedale when they did theirs probably about 10 years ago. That was to bring in more entertainment value, right? So you got the iFly, you got a lot of outlots that they sold, right, for different uses that are there, and then they've been bringing housing around it. Okay, so it's a strategy that tends to work or seems to work, but still, that mall struggles. You look at Southdale recently, right? Their biggest one was to bring Life Fitness. They basically had to give that space away to Lifetime. to get them to come there, but they knew that they needed to do that to maybe help revitalize that mall. So Southdale is struggling. And if you go there, right, you know, those that go out and shop in malls, it's not always that, right, that busy. And it's not disparaging for that, it's just hard, right? Retail and commerce is hard. And so we look at the Burnsville Shopping Center that we work with Burnsville, that came up for auction back in 2018. So we had long discussions with the council there about putting in a bid. Talk about controlling your destination, you know. Well, going in and buying a mall is hard, right? Not only is it inexpensive, but there's a lot of hair on them, as we say, right? Because you have cross easement arrangements, you got lease arrangements, all these other things. Well, you know, we were looking to put together a package to put in a bid for the city because they really wanted to be in the driver's seat. They had a big plan for what they wanted to happen in that area, and it wasn't to look like a mall anymore, right? It was about bringing housing. It was about bringing entertainment uses. It was basically cutting the mall in half and putting roads through and bringing more public amenities to that area. Well, they ended up not putting in a bid, decided not to do that to figure out the risk reward of that and wait to see what happens. So it sold for $18 million, and then it sold again in '23 to another group for undisclosed amount. So they're still waiting on redevelopment, okay? They have a great plan, they have a vision, but the people who have bought the mall don't have the same vision, right? They have a different vision. You know, and the city set up, they got special legislation, right? They got the tools, they're set when this thing is ready. But again, you still have to have those active partners that share your vision and want to do what you want to do. So with that, I am just going to end it there and happy to answer any questions. Or do you want to talk next steps, or?
Mr. Sable.
Thank you, Madam President and Commissioners. I think this is, I want to thank Danette and Stacy for just putting this together. This is incredibly complicated, and it's the question that we often hear all the time when we're out in the community. National Night Out, it was no different. You know, what's going on? They see things that are being developed and say, well, what's going on over here? And then what about this other thing? And I think, you know, people are out in the community, they see these things, they experience them, and I think this is a really good opportunity for us to sort of have a really good, long conversation about what does it mean to be involved and engaged in this kind of work. And so Stacy's experience has been tremendously helpful, and they're a wonderful financial advisor for us. But I do know that, right, as Maplewood starts to make more investments in fire EMS service and adding 3 firefighters, that's going to add to the cost of the enterprise. If there's going to be a compensation study that's proved and implemented, that's going to add to the cost of services. And I genuinely do worry about long-term, right? Does the revenue model exist to support those increases in services? Because we also hear, right, people love those services and they want more of them. And so there's this constant tension about how do we develop in a way that continues to, right, quote unquote, pay the bills every day. And so that's why occasionally stepping back and saying, what are the areas that we want to focus on? There was a bullet on the last slide that talked about the mall valuation. 83% of the value of the property or of the site is in the land, right? So if you think about it, if your own house, you know, your front yard would be worth 83% of the property. That would be sort of strange in a housing standpoint, and it would be blighted, and it would probably meet the standard for tear down. The mall is maybe in that category of, and so one of the things that we're also doing on our end is doing a lot of research and data about what are those sites that maybe have the reverse opportunity, where maybe the land value is more than the building value. Is that an opportunity site for us to think about ways to do that? And then the last thing I want to say is I have mentioned the ability to do pooled TIF. I identified that early on as, I think, one way to help build that fund to increase our capacity to do quality work. If it's money that's sitting there, I advocate strongly for going out and getting that authority so we can put it to better use. And so the last thing I'll say is this is a really complicated process, and so that's why we're going to do it in at least 4 parts, and maybe 5, and maybe 6. I don't think this conversation ever ends. So from that standpoint, the other, having really long, robust conversations about what it looks like and what role we can play. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, the more clarity that you can get from the governing body, the better staff can execute. And so I'd really turn it over to you to talk.
Councilmember Cave.
I just want to comment, thank you, Stacy and Danette. You guys did a great job. Feeling like you're doing a really good job up here, and I think everybody has. You kind of expose the fact that there's so much more we could be doing. And you think what you know is, you just don't realize what you don't know. And today you guys kind of opened my eyes to a lot of tools that we haven't used yet and how we think we're sitting in a really great spot. It really helps for you to put the reality out there to say, we might be at 1.5 million and we're like, woohoo. And you're like, no. I mean, if you want to be comfortable and drive this machine, you have to be more towards 20. So it's like, okay, well, we're off the mark on that. So, where we think we're at and having the truth and seeing where we're at, I think is going to be a great discussion for our council that I didn't even know to ask those questions. And I think it's phenomenal to have those in the back of your mind when you do make those decisions, like you said, because then you're making decisions with a larger vision and seeing where the money needs to go. So you're not just saying, oh, we can't ask for this, or people do love public safety. Our city is phenomenal, and they're known for that, but that doesn't mean that citizens don't want to keep the same. I mean, they want the housing to keep being family and make the housing nice, but it's also, things like the mall. We do have to look at stuff like that, and those things are big investments, but we have to start planning now if we're going to really be a player in the game. So I appreciate all the information you gave us today, and I look forward to digging into this more because I really didn't realize it was so in-depth. I thought, oh, there's a few pieces we can put here and there, and we meet every now and then, but I appreciate you opening my eyes to all this, so thank you.
I too want to say thank you very much because this is something that I have been wanting since my time on the council. So I can say that in the last 10 years, we have been making small steps forward, incremental steps. Right now, we sit as an EDA and we have HRA authority. We didn't have that before. We didn't have both of that. That was something that Ron helped us do based on a recommendation, that would put us in a better position, he said too, I think the best position, in order to really move forward and accomplish things. So we have been moving forward. It's now that we are in a position where we can begin to accelerate this. And I think we see it coming, if just driving around our community and you can see some of the things that are starting to pop, and people are asking about those things. And yes, we've been working hard at trying to build up the EDA. I mean, I remember at one point, there was basically nothing in the EDA. I mean, it was just very, very little money. So now is the time that things seem to be happening out in the community. I really appreciate this, and I think it's important to break this down. This was a great first presentation because we are, council, going to be able to get to make a lot of, I think, very important decisions about the vision. A lot of times, we go through and we think about the business of the city today to keep the lights on and to keep public safety going and all of those things. We're now in a position where we have gotten ourselves, now we can move forward much faster and very intentionally. So I am really glad to have you on board, and Ms. Parr, and all the things that you're presenting to us. I think this is absolutely wonderful. Councilmember Villavicencio.
Yes, and I'm excited about this too. I think it's obvious from every other previous comments that this is a complicated situation, especially when we're involving levies and things like that. But on the other side, it's very exciting because, before I was elected, I got to be on the North End Task Force, and so discussing a lot of those issues years ago then was a lot of down these lines that we're talking about today. And I think a lot of those conversations stay true to then as they do today, like the regional leadership. I think this is an opportunity that it can continue Maplewood's legacy of having to be a regional leader. I think making sure we are a walkable community, I think is really important. And, you know, like the mixed use, really increasing our ability to have mixed use, I think is exciting. And I don't know enough about it, but I want to know more about how we as a city can encourage different types of housing too. You know, Ms. Parr knows that I always ask her about what's going on with the mall area. I frequent that area all the time, and it's one of those things for me that it's like a double-edged sword. I love it, and I enjoy being there all the time, but then I get very frustrated with the things that are not improving. And I can see the potential that we have in our city, and so I'm excited that this conversation is starting.
Any other council members? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you again for coming out tonight, Stacy. There's 3 key points that you really hit home tonight, and one of my favorite words is being intentional. And I think, you talk about, the reality is change is happening, whether you want it or not. Need to anticipate and manage change, influence how our community is changing. And I am super excited to work with our commission about the future of Maplewood with this piece. And I've done economic development work at a micro level, but this is that macro level where we get to really impact people, not just within our city, but folks who want to come into our city. So super excited about this and can't wait till our next conversation.
Anyone else? Mr. Sable.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioners. I think, one of the things that I'll share is, right, that $20 million might be what the target is for communities that want to really drive this, and those communities are sort of in a different place, a different starting point. I also want to sort of take into account the exciting sort of leverage that we have. There's this burgeoning sort of momentum, right? You've got the work that was done in Gladstone was intentional. It said we're going to make these strategic investments, and then we're going to see housing development come from that, and right, we're breaking ground, and all of these things are happening, and so that it wasn't by chance, it was by design. And I think we know that there are other opportunities in other parts of the city, and I'll take, right, St. John's as an example of, right, if they double the size of their campus, that will be a significant driver of economic change, right? You'll start to see clinics pop up, and you'll start to see adjacent services that would serve the hospital then also locate there. And so there's sort of an opportunity for some economic growth. And I continue to know that, right, the new CEO at 3M has said that while they encourage and support remote work, that there's also an opportunity for people to have an office experience. And so they know that they're seeing more and more people coming every day, and those people are then coming into Maplewood. And so how can we then bring these housing options and opportunities to some of those people who are coming into the community every day? And so there is this potential flywheel effect that an investment in one area will yield to an investment in another. And then the last thing I'll say is there is, I was struck by the chart about housing ages and housing stock. And so if you're a house built in 70 is, if according to my math, right, 54 years old. I was able to do that without using my fingers. But at that age, right, that's where that opportunity to maybe do an investment in sort of freshening up housing stock then has the added benefit of saying, well, that's a now more valuable property. And so every house in the block or every house about that size also starts to see that little increment. And so it doesn't have to be a big, splashy, singular thing. It can also be incremental growth in the 16,000 plus housing units. And so it doesn't have to be, you can think both big and small, and the results might be the same. And so that's really one of the things that we'll dive into later this year.
One of the things I know that, having been on the council for 10 years, is there has been a theme, a desire to help, because we do have aging housing stock, is also because we are such a green city, to help our residents with energy efficient kinds of upgrades to their furnaces, their air conditioners, those kinds of things, to insulation, to new windows, There's also been certainly talk that has happened with the EDA before about helping young families or new families get into their first homes. So there's a lot of things that we can do that will have a great impact on families that will then spread. It's kind of like dropping that pebble into the water and watching those rings develop as we figure out really how we can use the resources and the tools that we're learning about, how we can use those in our community to help our community. Very futuristic looking, but I think that the impact that we can have on families and on people that want to come to our community, I love that right now we are talking, when you think about this, we have development from higher-end homes down at the ponds to Beacon Interfaith and supportive housing, to affordable housing, to senior housing, to market rate. I'm thinking of all of the other projects. I don't know if I've missed anything, but I think that in my mind, is key, that we have to look at how we can provide a variety of housing stock to people so that people want to come to Maplewood, and that this is really a life cycle that they can enjoy and continue to be in Maplewood, because we're reinvesting into the community. So this is really exciting stuff for me, and I'm really glad that we've got our first discussion. Ms. Parr, do you want to, as just kind of a closing point, our next discussion, tell us just the next steps? Or Stacy, maybe you can too, just to remind us and anyone who's watching.
You bet, Madam President, members of the commission. We have, the next step will be when the Ramsey County comes to visit with us. They'll talk a little bit about what they have, some specific things that they would like to share with the EDA. They have some hopes for moving forward with their EDA and some goals that they want to share. We're hoping as a part of that conversation to also talk about opportunities they have, particularly in the housing arena. They have a lot of programs. When we talk about rehab as something that we want to look at, they already have some things in place. We have some resources coming in, but every time we have to hire staff, that take some of those resources away. So there's a potential that if they already have it in place and we can utilize it, and if we think it's effective in getting the priorities met that you may have, then that may be something to look at, or other things similar to that. So that'll be the next big thing. And then we're hoping in October to hit the road. We really want to get out while we've still got light early enough in the day and before the snow flies, and have some conversations about what's going on. I think we all see when we drive around, I drive around a lot, I'm sure you all do as well, and you see the movement of the dirt and the walls going up, and it's super exciting. It's even more exciting when we go by the sites where we know we've got some opportunities. We know we've got some code enforcement issues and other things, and sometimes the best way to deal with those is to make them highest and best uses. So we want to talk about that. That'll be the next big things coming up.
Thank you for that.
You bet.
Councilmember Judeman.
As the one who's been sitting here the longest and waiting for this to happen, I first asked for low-cost loan money in a fund in 2004, but, I'm patient.
20 years, that's all.
Yeah, a mere 20 years. I knew we would get there someday. Just knew it. But one thing I would like to point out, and it has affected us to a certain extent, is that Ramsey County didn't do anything about having an HRA until recently. All the other counties around have had it for years, some as long as 15 years. And so if we didn't have that county partner ready to do this, one of our tools was really missing from the box. So I'm glad they're finally doing it and we can get in and do some of this. But part of that is we had to have somebody in that gap. So now we have a way to do it.
It is an exciting time. I don't see any other lights on. And so, commissioners, I think that was the last thing on our agenda. Yes, it was. So with that, commissioners, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.